Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Richard Listens podcast. I'm Richard Olberger, clinical psychologist, and I'm your host for today. Thank you for joining me. And we have our guest who was on Instagram Live with us on Friday talking about his specialty, the world of tennis and performance psychology. Thank you again to all my subscribers, for all of you who've been signing up for email lists, signing up on our patreon.com page to support the show, patreon.com/Richard Olberger, /Richard Listens rather, and Instagram at Richard Listens. Please tweet at me, Instagram, Facebook, sign up, subscribe, and listen. Please take the time, send this to 2 friends that you think might like the show. And thanks again to our sponsor, Impact Dental Designs, mouth guards for performance athletes, including soccer, boxing, football, and MMA. If you watched last weekend's fights with Lyman Good, then you saw custom-made mouth guards being put to great use for that heroic fight. My guest today, Mr. Josh Berger, is a Division I tennis coach. He's also been doing that for the last 2 years. And he also has been working with performance athletes himself through a company called Tiebreaker, Psych. He is willing to talk to us about the world of tennis and how it's impacted through Corona and beyond, and what it's like to work with tennis athletes on this of elements of performance and how they're navigating the whole post-Corona and beyond. He'll help take a look at performance routines that might help tennis players in ways in which they keep themselves focused in the moment, and letting go of any holdups, concerns, fears, doubts that they have, so it doesn't impact their game ongoing. Again, I'm Richard Listens. Hope all of you are staying safe out there, remaining authentic, and true to those who love you, and figuring out creative ways to stay healthy, both physically and emotionally and mentally. And I know how difficult this can be. This is uncharted territory. Please don't fret. Reach out to a professional. There's many resources, including myself, willing to get online. Other forms of therapies opening up now, regulations changing, that you do not need to be alone, and you can figure out creative ways to navigate through this crisis. Without further ado, I'm happy to bring to you Mr. Josh Berger.
Thank you for joining us on the show, Josh Berger.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So I just got done singing your praises. You are the founder of Tiebreaker Psych, and you're also Division I tennis coach at, is it Sacred Heart University?
Yep, that's correct. Well, first off, thanks for having me, Richard. Really is great to be with you today. Over the past 2 years, I've been the assistant men's and women's tennis coach at Sacred Heart University, which is a Division I university in Fairfield, Connecticut, which is actually where I grew up, right less than 10 minutes from here. So it's nice to be a part of a university where I've spent a lot of time there growing up, playing tournaments. And last fall, I started Tiebreaker Psych LLC, which is a sports psychology coaching business where I work with groups and individuals of all different types of ages, levels, sports on the mental side of the game.
Oh, that's incredible that you're so close to where you grew up. Was tennis a first love for you? When did you discover it?
Tennis has definitely been something that I've been passionate about for a long time. I actually started with a couple other sports, soccer, baseball, basketball, and though I enjoyed them, something about tennis really drew me in, maybe the individual aspect of it. And once I started getting more serious about it, that sort of became my focus. I would say I started taking it more seriously in middle school, and started playing tournaments, and then throughout high school and college, certainly played a lot, and have been, very serious about sport ever since.
That's incredible. So was this like a dream job for you to come back home and coach there, or how did that end up happening?
Yeah, it was actually funny. So I moved out west, actually closer to your neck of the woods after my undergrad, and I moved to Long Beach, where I did my master's in sport and exercise psychology at Cal State Long Beach. And after that, moved up to San Francisco for about 6 months, and I was coaching at a big tennis club there, and then decided to move back home to Connecticut to be closer to my family, and didn't think I was going to stay in Connecticut. Thought Boston or New York would be my more likely destination, but the position at Sacred Heart opened up, right down the road, and it was a great opportunity to start coaching college tennis, to work with a men's and a women's team, and at a Division I environment. So yeah, it really was a great opportunity.
And do you find, I mean, I know that the performance psychology background helps with coaching, and it can help, in a variety of ways. Is it a good way to be able to implement sports psychology skills, or do you find when you're the coach, it's hard to be also the objective observer about what's happening in the dynamic with the player, and to do both hats? Is there room for that in the role that you're currently in, and is that, how does that play out in the future for you?
Yeah, it's definitely a unique role. I don't know too many other people in the sports psychology field that have a similar role necessarily, where they're working for a team in a coaching role, like an assistant coaching role, and also um, doing a lot of mental skills in sports psychology. I think it can be challenging in a certain way, where players um, maybe they don't always feel comfortable about addressing certain things, because they know that I'm part of the decision-making process, frankly, when it comes to lineups and when it comes to making decisions about the team. But what I found over the past 2 years is that I've had an easier time implementing more mental skills into practice and doing workshops. So the sort of what I've tried to do is, have some individual conversations, but really try to implement as many sports psychology concepts in a team environment as possible, to sort of eliminate that conflict of interest that could possibly come about in me having to make decisions, and then also, them confiding in me in that sports psychology role.
Does your school bring in somebody from the outside? Like, how do you keep yourself in your coach role? Or would you recommend that your players work with an outside professional? Or
Well, generally they just work with me. I mean, the way it works is that each team sort of does their own thing, where they might each team might bring somebody in. So I essentially, that's the hat that I wear with the team. But it really goes on a team by team basis. I think certain players might have somebody else that they talk to outside of the team, but within the team, they'll talk to me about mainly, not really clinical matters, but things that have to do with performance. How can we come up with some strategies that they can, do in between points, that they can do the night before matches, things that, ways to review their matches, thinking about how we can practice in a better way, how we can enjoy practice more, how the team can all operate, in a cohesive way. So that's where I think I can really add value.
yeah, and you mentioned, so a lot of what we do in sports psychology, talking about preparing for the mental game, mid-game, post-game, right? So we kind of went into it a little bit on the live Instagram Live on Friday, but what would you say are some ways that tennis players in particular can prepare themselves mentally on those three levels: pre, post, and mid-game?
Yeah, I think when it comes to pre-game, I think visualization is huge. I think if you can, this could just be done with a few minutes before the game or a few minutes the night before, but really, closing your eyes, really trying to get into the mindset as if you're actually in that moment, and try to incorporate as many of the senses as possible of a particular scene. So I think visualization is extremely important before, or sort of in that pregame type of environment. what have you found to be helpful for working with players of different sports to prepare for a sporting environment, particularly a stressful one or a high pressure environment?
Yeah, thanks for tying me in. I've been working with some MMA fighters. Obviously, with MMA or basketball, it's going to be different. I think team sports might have it a little bit different, but MMA as a whole, I'm both in awe of their preparation. I mean, some fighters are sleeping in the ring the night before to habituate themselves to being in this environment, to make it feel less stressful, to make it feel like home. Not everyone has that kind of access, but some of the things obviously you have shadow work, doing all your moves as if you're fighting against the opponent, maybe using your offhand, or having somebody, like a sparring partner who imitates some of the moves of your opponent. Some of it may be, like you said, visualizing when you're tired, or actually practicing when you're at your most fatigued, right? Because it's not when you're strong, probably, that your mental lapse starts to happen. So, and a lot of what we've gotten from the skills is also how is your listening when you're fatigued? Are you listening to your corner? We hear it on TV, right? Keep your left up, right. But how is your communication with your partner? So practicing that in the preparation leading up. How well are you listening? How well are you taking in information, even when your emotional and physical resources are stressed, so that when you get into a fight, it's like you've already been there?
That definitely makes sense. I think the communication piece is huge. I mean, I like to say that we play how we practice, right? So if a player is getting all upset during practice because they're missing shots, or if I don't feel that I can talk to them, or they don't feel that, or if their partner in a doubles format can't communicate well with them during practice, then what's going to happen when we're actually in a competition, when the pressure is a lot higher? So I think the communication piece, whether it's in an individual setting or in a team setting, is huge. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it's really humbling when an MMA fighter who, we might stereotypically think, especially someone who's, trained to fight to survive, we think of this like animal instinct kind of thing. So, but on the other hand, there has to be this real respect for your opponent. There has to be a real awareness, some of the more developed, higher level executive functioning, built in. So having somebody who you communicate with and the trust there, and also an awareness about how you are as a communicator and a listener. So what I'll be interested, is like I have a few tennis clients who've come to me at lower levels or recreational levels, and they tell me in their relationship to the coach, maybe they don't want to offend the coach. Maybe they're kind of a people pleaser on some level, and they don't want to tell the coach that they're not going to use a certain stroke that they've been working to implement, or to tell the coach maybe, hey, like too much stimuli, like boundary, right? Because it's on the fly, so it's too much right now. I got to go through my process from point to point. I'll self-correct. So how do you build that in, right, with a tennis player, especially from a young age, like this ability to kind of tell you what they need? And as a coach, is that a hard thing to kind of self-monitor around?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think as coaches, and I work with the university level players, but also junior players or adult players that are more recreational. So I think part of being a good coach is teaching a tennis player to be self-reliant, because it's actually rare that a coach is going to be on the sideline with them, being able to coach them through a match. There are situations in professional tennis as well as college tennis where you will have a coach on your side, but most of the time it's just you out there. Like an MMA fighter in the ring, they might have their team in between rounds that they can go to. But when they're actually out there, it's not like, football where you have 10 guys on either side of you, or basketball or soccer or a sport like that where you're surrounded by teammates. It's just you out there. You have to be self-reliant. You have to be able to figure out what's going on around you and adapt to the circumstances. So I think, trying to teach athletes to be self-reliant, but also as a coach, when you do have that opportunity to be out there with them, rather than overcoaching and feeling like you have to say too much, which is certainly something I feel like I went through in the beginning. Sometimes learning that less is more, learning to, say, you got this, just trust your strokes, go for it. You know what to do. You've been through it before, rather than really trying to lay out a very, very specific game plan for them. So just sort of letting them take control.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest areas of growth, in my hat as a youth coach, is when you watch, Phil Jackson or one of these coaches that says almost nothing, right? Like they just watching, and then they call a timeout, and they let the players sit down, they let them talk, and then they come into the end and say little, if anything,
Absolutely.
And learning that, like, what it was, after a win, say little, after a loss, say less, so really learning about the emotions of players, especially if you're working with like downtown LA soccer players here in Los Angeles, where their parents, some of them were professionals at 13 and 15 years of age in their own country. They're going to have a hard ride home. The pressure's felt, the culture is intense. So really being careful around, the intensity. Whereas when I coach, I tend to be hyper verbal. It's almost like the anxiety extends out through being verbal, and that doesn't always make an effective communicator. Was there someone who modeled that for you, learning how to, say less, or how did you learn that? Were there coaches you had that you were like, that way works more than the other?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I've certainly been around coaches who have been on both sides of that. And I think I myself have been, in many ways, been on both sides of that. I think you bring up Phil Jackson, and through watching The Last Dance recently and just seeing his Zen-like personality, and I know he worked a lot.
I was going to ask about your Corona-based viewing, your quarantine-based viewing. So
I was locked in, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, there's somebody like him who really has the ability to read the room, and really, I know he has a lot of mindfulness training himself, and is able to sort of just be aware of the situation and doesn't feel like he has to insert himself in every way and always be speaking, but can sort of let the players take control to a certain extent and have that autonomy to run things in the way that they best see fit, and he can sort of just guide the ship. From my own experiences, I've had one of my coaches growing up, Charles is his name. He sort of had a way of coaching through inspiring. So rather than saying that I had to play a certain way, his message that he would just say, repeatedly, was be all you can be. So sort of leaving it up to me to decide what that meant exactly, decide, how I could best maximize my ability and my talents, rather than saying, you have to play super aggressive, or you have to be the most consistent player out there. But hey, be all you can be, make the most of what you have. So, and through coaching, I've certainly been around some coaches, one in particular who worked a lot with the author of The Inner Game of Tennis, which I think is a great sports psychology book, which really, talks about sort of doing less, focusing maybe just on the ball, or
for our listeners, just right, that book, is it Pressfield?
Galway.
Galway. Tim Galway, and the inner game of tennis is mental skills for all walks of life. So you don't have to be a tennis player, and if you're interested in getting something off the shelves, really easy to read and break apart maybe different ways in which you might approach the inner game of sport, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's a book from the '70s that I think is as relevant now as ever. It really helps tennis players, but helps athletes and I would say performers of all kinds get out of their own head by noticing the yourself, noticing the way that you talk to yourself, and by trying to clear those thoughts so that you can just perform without the distraction of constantly judging yourself. So through working with an individual who had a lot more of that philosophy, he found that by constantly guiding players and constantly overcoaching them, that wasn't so effective. So he taught me a style of really less is more, of let them figure it out for themselves, and they're gonna learn it a lot better that way, and you can just help to guide that process rather than really pressing and sort of saying this is how you're going to play, and let me help you do that, but instead taking a step back and trying to just let them find it themselves.
And how do you find that working? At the Division I level, certainly the most competitive, level of sports at the collegiate level. These are players who've probably, been very dominant coming up through the ranks. Do they buy into, right, the team element of tennis, right? You have to rank order, you have to choose doubles teams. I mean, are they able to check their ego at the door? Are they willing to be coached? How do you incorporate that at this high level?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So tennis is a sport where most players growing up, they'll play tournaments, and it's all about them. It's all about their results, their performance, and then all of a sudden, maybe they've played high school tennis, or some of the players at a higher level have maybe played for their country, or they've played in another team environment. But all of a sudden, they're playing for not just themselves, but they're playing for the university on their clothing. They're playing for all their teammates. So I think it can be a bit of a transition for a lot of them. I think a lot of them really enjoy it because maybe they lost their match, but the team won. So rather than pouting and being all upset, you still have, hey, maybe I didn't play well today, but my teammates, stepped up and we got the W. So I think a lot of players, especially if the team environment is new to them, they really do enjoy collegiate sport. Have you found that as well, working with individual athletes that maybe transition more into a team role in different sports? I mean, obviously there are different psychological factors in an individual environment compared to a team environment.
Found it difficult getting the buy-in, or
I guess have you found any players that have maybe been more traditionally individual sports that have started maybe competing in a second sport that's a team sport, or started to work with teammates around them that maybe they haven't been used to in the past?
I'm working with a lot of a mixture of athletes, but I'd say that, when you get a high school athlete or team, even if they're multi-sport athletes, they're usually at a better stage of willing to be molded. And at least here in Los Angeles, where, things, at least in the basketball realm, are so competitive from a young age, that they're getting mental skills and a variety of people that are trying to work on building aspects of team cohesion and role acceptance and things like that. On the other hand, if you have been the alpha player, if you've always been the one that things are focused around, it may be difficult to get that buy-in when talent is still what is separating you. So sometimes, it takes, when players make that jump, to the next level, and it's a little bit more equalized talent-wise, where they realize they need to develop mental skills. There's other things that are separating them. Maybe they notice somebody, or there's some athlete that motivates them if they want to be great, if they have that. Otherwise, sometimes failure and struggling is what leads them to contact me. So, the beauty of kind of sitting with the psychologist degree is that sometimes it's not always clear when people come through the door what exactly they're needing, and whether it's more emotional, or something that's specifically performance based. So I try and really separate the two. But it can be complicated if what performance means to your identity, and what scoring the ball or having statistics means to you. So making certain shifts in your approach and becoming more process oriented may become really hard at first. People may see that as weakness, right? Right. That it may be seen as, it's some degree of removing a mask or a layer of, right, who I am and who I need to be to feel good about myself. So, doing some individual work to peel away the layers of the onion is kind of like my method, and where I'm aiming through Richard Liston's Crossing the Threshold, the book that'll be coming out this year, and through the podcast. What I love doing is peeling back with athletes what's behind who you are as an athlete, what motivates you. And sometimes I'm pretty amazed with how athletes make the transition from, being a basketball player to becoming a writer, or from becoming a college football player to becoming a public speaker. And it's not always linear. We see it as this long-term linear thing. Oh, that guy was successful in Division I football, and now he's, at this level. But there were ups and downs based on identity. And a lot of athletes go through this in any transition. So I'm ranting on, I think the question I can reflect back to you is, right, including this COVID quarantine, is how does an athlete deal with change and transition? How do they deal with a change in role? And in this case, right, a major transition, if you have a lost season, how can you adjust emotionally? So how at the Division I level and through tennis has this whole quarantine been adjusted to, and have players been able to stay focused mentally as well as physically?
Yeah, well, it's definitely been challenging. The way that we handled it was we set up weekly video calls with the players for whoever was interested, and they could sign on, and we'd address a certain topic. At first we started with handling adversity, because, as you said, players had gone through a significant loss, and really were, in that grief cycle, were dealing with grief and dealing with loss of a season, of maybe a piece of their identity. Maybe it was maybe some of the seniors will never get the chance to play college sports again. And that's very challenging. So we spoke a lot about dealing with adversity, also thinking about controlling the controllables and trying not to get too caught up in everything going on around us, but trying to really boil it down into what is important right now and what is within our control. And then if you catch yourself, overwhelmed with the whole situation, trying to bring it back to those core things. So I would say, yeah, trying to really, think about what can be controlled today. How can I have a routine today that can help me get, to feel more comfortable with all this uncertainty going on around me, but also to help me to, still achieve the goals that I've set for myself. Despite all this craziness that none of us expected, how can I still perform, frankly? So, it definitely has been challenging, but we've tried to set up an environment where players can continue, well, at least in the beginning when it happened, where players can sort of address these issues and we can have some discussions, but also talking about topics like handling adversity and trying to come up with some positive solutions there.
Is everything being done at a distance? I mean, the players on scholarship, do they stay close to the university, or do they eventually head home? I mean, how is it now heading into summer?
Yeah, well, it really shuts down. I mean, even in normal years, it really does shut down during the summer. Players do have workouts that they can do, and many of them, will play or compete during the summer. But it's on them. What they want to do and how much they want to do ultimately. So it really was, just as the season was wrapping up. I mean, we really stopped in the middle of March, and we're expecting for our regular season to go until the middle to end of April. So it really was that next month where most of the work was done. But now I think most of them are home, and maybe they've gotten together. But most of them, it's really been, I would say, more of an individual process. There's also a number of NCAA rules about continuing during the summer and everything. So it was really, that initial shock with everything that was going on, and then handling it in that moment, and hopefully providing some resources that they could refer to, later on in the process.
Yeah, I mean, that must be so challenging as an athlete, dealing with uncertainty. Did they keep some degrees of Zoom calls or trainings? I mean, dealing with uncertainty is just not, especially in an individual sport. How do you practice that self-reliance at a time like this?
Yeah, it's certainly not easy. I think, as a coach and as a sports psychology coach, I like to think that we've worked on, talked about uncertainty as a reality before this. You never know if you could face an injury. You never know when your doubles partner might not be available. You never know when somebody on the team might have to miss a match. Like there is all sorts of uncertainty that we were prepared for, that we had experienced before, but this was obviously on a whole nother level, and not just for us. So I really think it's a great chance for them to practice these mental skills that we've talked about in the past. I think this is really a great chance. We like to break things down into, is this a challenge or is this a threat? And tough situations can be seen as a threat, but if you can think in terms of your mindset and viewing it as a challenge, you can hopefully rise to the occasion. So that's the way that we present it, as, hey, how can you rise to this challenge? How can you view it as a challenge in your mind?
Yeah, I got to give a presentation for Maccabi International, and I called it Quarantunity, right? Because, and a lot has been, written historically. I know I kind of started to rack my brain early on when this happened. Where did this happen in history? What can we draw from? What can I look to? Some resource, some compass, somewhere, somebody, right? Give me a pathway, because it's completely overwhelming when you lose control at this level of your daily routines and of all the things we do that give us some sort of anchoring and stability, whether they be healthy or not. If that's what I do and where I go, if I get my coffee and my donut here, if I go to this gym, if I practice in this facility and see my coach at X time, that's what makes me feel secure. So it really helped me early on to be thinking about the opportunities that could be presented, at least in some sports. I know soccer players can do certain drills in the driveway. Basketball players can put up shots. Tennis players, you really need a court. And I know some people have been fortunate enough, other people, to have a court or to have one nearby of a coach, or, but otherwise people are finding walls to hit off of. It's really challenging when you're environmentally dependent.
It's true. As you said, not everybody is so fortunate to have access to a court right now. Thankfully, more and more places have reopened, but it's still is challenging for many people right now. I think, during this time, I heard about people being very creative. Maybe they would hit against a wall. Maybe they'd hit against the side of their house. Maybe just picking up a racket and doing some shadow swings, looking in the mirror. Also
Yeah.
think, also a chance. Individuals were telling me that, hey, this is a great chance to really work on the mental game. This is people telling me they got into a meditation practice for the first time in their life, or started really visualizing.
I'm glad you said that, Josh, because I thought one of the real gifts of the quarantine was mindfulness and right, the opportunity. First, you have to be willing to be still. It's hard to do mindfulness or visualization if you're not comfortable slowing down. And initially, it was like this immediate permission to just stop. There's nowhere you can go. So getting this place of acceptance, because what happens to most people when they begin doing meditation, 1 minute, 3 minute, 15 minutes, your mind is racing and telling you need to go somewhere. And if you can, you may, but when you can't, and it's more uncomfortable, right? But those feelings of uncomfortability are part of what you need to get through, right? And for a tennis player or basketball player, if it's the end of the game and there's incredible tension, being able to breathe and let go of that negative thought or feeling within, or even muscle tension before you take that free throw. And if you're a tennis player and you're down 4-1 to an opponent you think you should be crushing, and you're making a ton of unforced errors, that's exactly when you need to be incredibly still within yourself.
Absolutely. When you're in that type of situation, you need to recognize what's going on. If you're not aware of why you're down 4-1, then how are you going to turn the match around? So from a coaching perspective, a simple question of, hey, what's going on right now? Why, not so much why is the score the way it is, but a great question is, who's doing what to who right now? Is one player, is your opponent being really aggressive and you're just not able to keep up right now? Are you just hitting yourself off the court by trying to hit the ball too hard and you end up making too many errors? But that mindfulness really leads to awareness of self and awareness of your environment.
Are you asking yourself those questions almost unconsciously on a point-to-point basis?
Ideally, you want to be aware of those types of things. But I find that tennis players are so caught up in what's going on and sometimes so frustrated, especially if they're losing, that they lose track of why it's happening, frankly. So I think as a coach, reminding them of hey, okay, I see what's going on here, but why do you think that's happening? So trying to get their perspective and maybe get them to take a step back and look at it, from an outsider's perspective, or to try to see, be aware of the whole situation. So not just be aware of them, but maybe be aware of something that the opponent's doing, or the way the direction that the match is heading. So I do find that mindfulness has a very important role when you can get into the present moment and simply notice how you're feeling. Notice, hey, maybe I'm not performing my best because I'm feeling really tight. And I've, ever since I stepped off the bus today, I've just been feeling really tight, and I haven't thought to utilize any sort of mental skills to release that tightness. I haven't utilized those breathing routines. I haven't stopped myself and maybe just closed my eyes for a second and said, it's okay. I'm in a performance setting, but I'm excited, viewing those sensations in a positive way. So
the helping people recognize the closeness between anxiety and excitement, right? They're on the same continuum. And so the purpose of practicing these performance routines and having worked through them is that they can go from conscious to being conscious, or it becomes natural, like, okay, take a breath, right? Repeat one of your self-talk, right? Like just focus on next point, right? Be more aggressive, right? Little quick self-talk things to help make adjustments.
Absolutely.
so that it's not like the point of no return, right? The cliff that we talk about, like people just falling off, where the anxiety's too high and they know something's wrong and they have, they do not know how to slow it down to be present.
Absolutely. And I think if you can catch yourself or just notice it, then you can respond. Where if you don't notice it and then you're just going to react. So I think it's that difference between slowing yourself down and noticing what's going on so that you can sort of choose your response, and just simply reacting or maybe lashing out in anger or frustration because of how you're feeling. One question that I have for you is, do you find when athletes are experiencing anxiety or are tight before a performance, do you have any tips or any suggestions for how they can help to work through those feelings? Do you find that by helping them view it as excitement is helpful, or what other strategies do you like to implement?
Yeah, great question. I mean, first of all, I think normalizing for everybody, whether you're Michael Jordan or whoever it may be. I mean, it's it's the NBA Finals. It's a big game. There's going to be some anxiety there. So normalizing that they're natural feelings. That so some players like to do, see a lot of players with music, something that gets them into the place of just the comfortable warm up routine, something that keeps it as normal as possible for how you get into that state of readiness, right? We, in some levels, increasing anxiety levels is natural. We don't want to be flat, both physically, right? We need to warm up. You want to have a dynamic warm up. You want to feel more alert and ready for what's going on. And emotionally as well. You want to be up for the challenge, right? How many times have we seen somebody underestimate or come out flat and wind up losing a game they should win? So I think the performance routines help because it can help both formulate your attack and your strategy. It can also incorporate breathing. So helping people with breathing exercises to relieve tension, to really consciously, focus on inhaling and exhaling for like double the amount of the inhale, practicing that so that your tension is kind of left out of the body. We just started to mention some of those positive self-talk things, like, really quick, short, positive things that you say to yourself to get yourself mentally game ready. Maybe, and if it's a baseball player, you may have to have certain things that you say to yourself also, right, mid-pitch. Things could shift where you're coasting along doing very well to things not going your way. A pitch doesn't go your way, a call, a couple of mistakes by your teammates, and all of a sudden you're in a different place stress-wise. So keeping that in your arsenal, how are you going to handle stress? How can you let go? What are some things you can kind of do to kind of self-soothe or ground yourself and get back in to your body and your breath and out of the stress? So those are some of the things that I like to incorporate into my work.
That definitely makes sense. I think when you mentioned grounding yourself. I think when an athlete can incorporate that tactile sense and really I find it helpful actually to get athletes sometimes in between points to actually just feel the ground beneath your feet. Notice the ground beneath your feet. And I find that
it's the most simple thing, right? That you can tell people, right? At any level, whether they be in the therapy office, right? Like, what's happening with your toes right now? What's happening with your feet?
Exactly. And how often do you really notice it on a normal basis? So getting in touch with those senses can help to bring you back into that present moment rather than being lost in thought, wondering with the what ifs about the future. In a baseball environment, let's say, and the count is 3-0. What's going to happen if I walk this batter? But instead of thinking like that, or instead of being in the past, or I can't believe I let up that triple, to the last batter. But being able to brush both of those aside and get in touch with those senses and get back into that present moment about what's really happening right now. I find to be one of the keys.
Yeah, I mean, we had another, just because you mentioned, Boston, we had Bob Tewksbury on the show. His book, I think it's called 90% Mental. Great book to read if you want to learn about mental skills in baseball. But, preparation-wise, that was one of the main strengths, right? As a pitcher, what am I going to do? What would I throw in different counts? What is he expecting? So there's a lot of mental preparation to make sure you're not going to default. Am I just afraid on the second serve, and so I'm going to just lob one over, or do I take a breath, reground myself, and deliver my best possible serve, right? So not tightening up in those situations can be the difference between winning and losing. In fact, staying aggressive may be what gets you back in and helps you defeat your opponent versus when they're hungry for your, soft second serve because, they know when you're behind, that's your tendency. So learning these things about yourself and learning how to adjust to them is the real gift of mental skills training, and why, athletes really need to be at this stage, right, all through the highest level, need to be incorporating this if they want to succeed over the long run. Have you seen a lot of, just in closing, some of the professionals that are using mental skills and talking about it?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I have found that over the past few years, there's always been stigma in sports to some extent, to varying extents, about psychology. But what I've found is that in tennis, it really has lessened at really a rapid pace. I mean, there's a player, Daniil Medvedev, who was in the U.S. Open final last year, who has his sports psychologist or sports psychology coach up in his box right next to his coach oftentimes. And players, openly talking about how they work with psychologists and how they focus on the mental side of the game. And, they don't view it as something something that is holding them back. They view it as, hey, this is something that I'm doing to try to maximize my ability, try to maximize my talent. And I think in other sports, I know in basketball, Kevin Love, among others, DeMar DeRozan, they've written about, very openly about mental health struggles. So I think across sport, the stigma has definitely lessened, and more athletes are really speaking out about how important the mental side of the game is, how they're working with sports psychology professionals, and how, this certainly shouldn't be stigmatized. And, by focusing on mental skills and mental skills training, you can really get the most out of your performance.
Right. Really important. Well, Josh, it's a real pleasure. Thank you for making so much of your time available. Please let everyone know how they can reach you and follow up with you, and learn more about the inner game from a modern tennis coach.
So thank you. So you can go to tiebreakerpsych.com. That's my website, or all my social media pages, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, are all at tiebreakerpsych. Or email me at josh@tiebreakerpsych.com. And thank you, Richard. This has really been an honor, and I've really enjoyed it. And just great to talk to a fellow professional in the field. It's really been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's exciting, and a shout out certainly to Carrie Cheadle and Sindra Kamphoff, paving the way in mental skills. If you haven't read Sindra's book, Beyond Grit, or Carrie Cheadle, Rebound, must reads for yourself in terms of working with injured athletes. And it's been a real joy to join a mastermind. If you yourself are looking to grow in your professional development right now, I suggest you joining a mastermind with like-minded individuals who can push you to get to your next level. Certainly Josh has pushed me today to get on the spot and get into my skin and come forward with my knowledge, and that can help you to crystallize what you're doing and what you're trying to bring forward if you're looking to create your side hustle into your main focus. Certainly, this podcast has been a gift. The quarantine, we've done more than since the quarantine, since we did in the previous 4 years. So if you know someone or you yourself work with athletes or performance and would like to share your journey, please reach out to us, and we'd love to feature you on the show. We'll be bringing forward to you later this month a panel for retired athletes, a separate podcast called Making the Jump. So keep your eyes out for that. Josh Berger, thank you so much for your time. We're grateful and look forward to connecting down the road.
Thanks, Richard.
Well, that was a real treat, everybody. Thank you to Josh Berger, who's made so much of his time this week to support, promote the show, and doing work with tennis athletes, both at the Division I Sacred Heart level and also through Tiebreaker Psych. Check him out on Instagram, and he's a wonderful resource and a kind, caring soul if you are looking for someone to work with your tennis player on the way up. I'm Richard Olberger, clinical psychologist. Please reach out to me if you are looking for clinical or performance-based work through this quarantine and beyond. If your relationship has been stressed, if your identity and your role, work or performance life has been addressed, or if this has brought up things from a long time ago based on all the time we've had to settle in and focus and the other stressors facing us as individuals and as a country. This can bring up a lot of questions about race, identity, political vision, and emotional state of how well we live in our relationship to self-care. Again, check me out on Instagram, Richard Listens, or patreon.com/Richard Listens to please support the show. Give what you can, $1 here, $1 there. It will build. We've been putting the energy in, and I know you can give something to keep it going. This is the way that we give you behind the scenes looks and advanced content. So we try and reward those who value us. Take care, everybody. I'm Richard Listens, and I'm out.